On the night of January 10th, 1992, 4 teenage girls ganged up to carry out a plan so shocking and horrible that even 25 years later, it still sends chills up your spine. For 10 hours, the girls tortured 12-year-old Shanda Sharer in the most brutal ways possible. Then they set her on fire and left her to die. Why'd they do it? Because the 16-year-old ringleader thought Shanda stole her girlfriend. Here's what happened. I'm Chris, and this is True Crime Recaps. Jealousy makes people do crazy things, but I have to warn you, the things you're going to hear are incredibly disturbing, and you won't believe this. Every one of the twisted killers I'm going to tell you about is out of prison and free today. It all started in September 1991 at Hazelwood Middle School in New Albany, Indiana. Shanda was the new girl. Her 7th grade year at Hazelwood was supposed to be a fresh start after her mother's latest divorce. She'd been on the cheerleading, volleyball, and softball teams at her old school in Kentucky, but she didn't know anyone in New Albany when she walked to her locker that first day. Then she met 14-year-old Amanda Hevron. Their relationship started off rocky. They got into a fight at school, and they both got detention because of it. Oddly enough, though, as they were stuck there together, the two girls formed a friendship that eventually grew into a sexual obsession for Amanda. At the time, Amanda was also sort of seeing another girl, 16-year-old Melinda Loveless. The two of them had been dating on and off for more than a year when Shanda caught Amanda's eye in the fall of 1991. Shanda was a pretty girl with a beautiful smile that drew people in, but she was naive and inexperienced when it came to romantic entanglements. That was the first year she'd gone to public school. Up to 7th grade, she'd been in a private Catholic school. On the other hand, Melinda had plenty of experience, and Amanda's obsession with the new girl made her crazy jealous. Much to Amanda's delight, she was now trying to juggle both girls. It all bubbled over when she took Shanda to a school dance in October. When Melinda saw them there together, she went nuts and threatened to kill Shanda. But that wouldn't be the last of it. Melinda started threatening Shanda in public. She told Amanda and anyone else who would listen that she wanted Shanda dead. Between the threats and Shanda's dropping grades, her parents pulled her out of school in November. And by December 1991, she was enrolled at a private Catholic school in New Albany. Her parents thought they'd seen the last of the older girl and all the drama she brought with her. But they didn't realize Amanda wasn't about to let their daughter go that easily. She was still calling and writing letters, and the girls were still secretly seeing each other when they could. Melinda was still sort of in the picture too, on and off, like they'd always been. But Shanda didn't know that. And by the new year, Melinda was sick of competing with a 12-year-old for Amanda's affections, so she decided to take drastic action to get revenge. On January 10th, 1992, 16-year-old Melinda teamed up with 17-year-old Lori Tackett and 2 15-year-olds, Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence, to carry out her plan. None of the other girls knew Shanda at all. They all lived in Madison, Indiana, about an hour away from New Albany. Hope and Tony were friends with Lori, and Lori was newish friends with Melinda. And before this, Tony and Hope had only met Melinda once. That night, the 4 of them were supposed to be going to a concert in Louisville, Kentucky. It was only about 15 minutes away from Melinda's house in New Albany, so the 3 of them drove down to pick her up. As they're getting ready to go out, she tells them they need to do something first. Lori already knew what the plan was, but the other girls didn't realize what they were getting into until Melinda showed them a big kitchen knife and told them she was going to scare Shanda with it. On the weekends, Shanda stayed with her father and his family in Jefferson, Indiana, about 15 minutes away from New Albany and just across the bridge from Louisville. So, on the way to the show, the girls made a stop at Shanda's dad's house. The plan was to lure her out of the house and, quote, teach her a lesson. To avoid raising suspicion, Melinda told Hope and Tony to go to the door and introduce themselves as Amanda's friends. And that's what they did. They told her Amanda wanted to meet up with her at a ruined, abandoned stone home overlooking the Ohio River that teenagers sometimes hung out in. They called this place the Witch's Castle. Shanda agreed to go, but said they'd have to wait until after midnight when her father would be sleeping. So, the 4 girls left and returned shortly after midnight. And by this time, Hope and Tony were getting a little freaked out by the way Lori and Melinda were acting, and Tony refused to go to the door to get Shanda. So, Hope and Lori did it instead. As they were at the house talking to Shanda, Melinda was hiding on the floor of the back seat under a blanket with a knife in her hand. Once Shanda got into the car, Melinda jumped out, grabbed her hair, and held the knife to her throat. As they said they would, the girls took a terrified Shanda to Witch's Castle, but Amanda wasn't there. Instead, what awaited Shanda was a night filled with pain, horror, and acts unimaginable to most people. That poor little girl was being held against her will by monsters, and not one of them would show any mercy to her. While the girls were in the ruins of the witch's castle, they bound Shanda's arms and legs with rope and tortured her. But there were too many cars passing by, and they got worried someone might spot them there, so Lori suggested they take her with them to a spot she knew in Madison. An hour later, they pulled into a wooded area off a logging road near Lori's house. Here, Melinda and Lori dragged Shanda into the glow of the headlights while Hope and Tony stayed in the car and watched. Outside, Melinda and Lori stripped Shanda of her clothes, then started hitting her, an assault which included Melinda kneeing Shanda in the face several times and sodomizing her. After they had beaten Shanda, Lori took out a knife and the girls tried stabbing her in the neck and chest, but the knife was too dull. After watching for a while, Hope left the car and held Shanda down while Lori and Melinda strangled her, first with their hands, then with a rope. When she passed out, they thought she was dead and they put her in the trunk. After this horrific brutality, the girls went back to Lori's house to clean up. They washed themselves off, unwinding after the horror they caused, but as they were cleaning up, they heard the muffled sounds of Shanda screaming from the trunk. Determined to kill the girl, Lori grabbed a paring knife from her kitchen and went back outside where she stabbed her until she went silent. Then she came back inside, washed up, and acted like nothing had happened. Hope and Tony were ready to call it a night, but Lori and Melinda were too keyed up to go to sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., Lori suggested they take a drive and figure out what to do with the body. But the little girl wasn't gone yet. As they were driving around, they heard screams coming from the trunk again. This time, Lori used a tire iron to knock her out again, and even after she passed out, she kept hitting her just because she thought it was fun. And this happened over and over again all night long. It was dawn by the time they got back to Lori's house and started telling the other girls what they had done. Their excited whispering woke up Lori's mother, who got mad at them for being so loud and staying up so late. So her daughter told her she'd take the other girls home. Melinda, Lori, Hope, and Tony got in the car, but they didn't go home yet. They still needed to cover up what they had done. So they went to a gas station and bought a big bottle of Pepsi, which they emptied and then filled with gasoline. And from there, they went to the burn pile near Lori's house where Melinda and Lori wanted to show off what they had done. And Tony refused to look, but Hope went to the trunk to see Shanda. While she looked down at the girl's broken, bleeding body, Hope grabbed a bottle of Windex that was in the trunk and sprayed her with it, saying, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" But the worst was yet to come. Having had their fill of fun and revenge, they took Shanda to a field, wrapped her up in the red blanket Melinda had been hiding under, and posed her with her underwear partly off. Lori instructed Hope to pour the gasoline over Shanda's body, and then, while she was still clinging to life, they set her on fire. And I can't even imagine how terrible this ending was for Shanda. She had to be so terrified, in so much pain. She was clearly a fighter, able to survive such brutal assaults. She didn't give up. She waited for a hero who would never come. Then, after 10 hours of torture, she succumbed to her injuries and died in the fire. But to make sure she was truly gone, the girls came back to the field so Melinda could pour the rest of the gas on her to make sure there was nothing left of her rival. Once they were through, the girls went to McDonald's and laughed about how the sausages looked like Shanda's body once they were through with her. Tony, on the other hand, was horrified. She called a friend while they were there and told her what had happened. And she wouldn't be the only one to share this secret, though. After Melinda and Lori dropped Tony and Hope off, they cleaned out the car and invited another friend of Melinda's over and told her everything. Then they went to pick up Amanda and told her what had happened too. And neither of the girls believed them at first until they showed them the trunk with Shanda's bloody handprints and socks still inside. As they were bragging about her murder, a couple of hunters stumbled across Shanda's body. She was so badly burnt from the waist up, they thought she was a mannequin at first. By 10:55 a.m. on January 11th, 1992, the police were on the scene. Meanwhile, Shanda's father had realized she was gone and no one had heard from her. At 1:45 that afternoon, she was reported missing. It didn't take long for the police to link the missing person report with the body they found in the field, and dental records confirmed their worst suspicions. But what happened to her wouldn't be a mystery for long. By 8:20 that night, Tony's guilt got the better of her. She went to the police station with her parents and told them everything that had happened. By the next day, all 4 girls had been arrested for Shanda's death. And though they might not have known it at the time, the 4 of them had something else in common besides the murder. They all shared incredibly screwed up childhood memories. And I say that not as an excuse for what they did, because nothing could ever excuse that. But if you're wondering if monsters like them are born that way or they're made, well, this might answer that question. Melinda grew up in a family that was beyond twisted. Her father was a cruel man, especially to his wife. He allegedly forced her into an open marriage and shared her with his friends, something she found repulsive. On one occasion, during an orgy at their home, she tried to commit suicide. And these attempts to end her life would happen repeatedly throughout Melinda's childhood. Although for some reason, Melinda blamed her mother for this behavior and idolized her father. Her sisters and nieces testified that he sexually assaulted and abused them. And though Melinda didn't want to admit to being sexually abused herself, she slept in the same bed as her father until she was 14 and he abandoned their family. Lori was also struggling to survive a traumatic home life. She was molested at least twice, at the age of 5 and again when she was 12. In May of 1989, her mother, who was a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian, learned that Lori was changing into jeans at school and tried to strangle her over it. This may have been the most extreme case of her mother's abuse, but it wasn't the only way her mother impacted her life. The more she was prevented from living like a quote-unquote normal teenager, the more she became fascinated by the occult, directly opposing the religious lifestyle her mother was trying to force on her. She engaged in self-harm, and she was admitted to the hospital where she was prescribed medication. Just days after she was released, Lori and her friend Tony attempted suicide. Now, Tony was abused by a relative at the age of 9, then raped by a boy when she was 14, just about a year before Shanda's murder. Our final perpetrator was Hope. Of all the girls, her home life was probably the least traumatic, although it was far from perfect. And these 4 girls experienced a lot of pain while they were growing up. But instead of making them empathetic to Shanda's suffering, they got caught up in this animalistic group mentality and put her through things that were far worse than anything any of them ever dealt with. With a crime this brutal, it was quickly decided they would be tried as adults. So, they all pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. Toni Lawrence got the lightest sentence since she confessed to the crime and agreed to testify against the others. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, though she only served 9. She was released on December 14, 2000. Hope Rippey got 60 years in prison, though 3 appeals brought the sentence down to 35, and she only served 14 years. While she was in prison, she got her GED and her bachelor's degree. She was released on April 28, 2006. Lori Tackett was sentenced to 60 years in prison, but was released after 25 years on January 11, 2018. Finally, we have Melinda Loveless. She was also sentenced to 60 years in prison, and since she was the mastermind behind the crime, she served the longest sentence of all. But by September 5, 2019, she was released. This is where the story of the crime ends, but the trauma from a murder like this spreads and changes every life that touches it. One of those people was Shanda's father. He drank himself to death in 2005 when he was only 55 years old. Her mother tried to forgive so the anger and hatred wouldn't kill her too. And while she was in prison, Melinda started training service dogs for disabled people, as well as dogs who were trained to be used in the courtroom to help abused and traumatized children. When Shanda's mother saw Melinda with one of these dogs, she said she saw someone who was almost reborn. Before that moment, she'd described Melinda as pure evil, someone who was hollow, without a soul. So she donated a dog named Angel to the prison for Melinda to train. Today, Melinda, like the other girls, is as free as you and me. And when she was released, she was paroled to Kentucky. And as far as we know, she still works as a dog trainer. It's not clear what the other girls are doing now, but both Amanda and Hope Rippey have appeared on Dr. Phil and talked about their involvement in the murder. Amanda says she didn't realize Melinda would go through with her threats, and Hope told Shanda's mother and sister that she just went along with it because she didn't know what else to do. Oh, and if you're wondering why she's smiling in her mugshot, she said it's because the guards told her to smile. And that's your recap. Do you think the girls are rehabilitated? Do you think they should have been set free? Let's talk about it in the comments. And thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If you like getting all the crime in half the time, it would mean a lot to us if you would give this a like and hit subscribe and the bell so you never miss a recap. Until next time, take care.